For context, I'm a 32-year-old guy, and at the time this happened, I was living in a town in Pennsylvania. I grew up around there, kinda a boring place, honestly. I fix cars, mostly on pickup trucks and older sedans, at a shop that's about a 15-minute walk from the duplex I was renting back then. I didn't own a car at the time because I was trying to save up for something decent instead of buying a beater that just cost me more in the long run. So walking was my main way to get to work and back. The walk itself wasn't bad, just a mix of residential streets, a stretch of road with some old warehouses, then a quiet back road that eventually curved into the neighborhood I lived in. The part near the warehouses always gave me weird vibes, though. Half the buildings looked abandoned, and the streetlights were either too dim or completely out. Sometimes you'd pass by graffiti that looked fresh, or you'd see old beer cans crushed up near the loading docks, like kids had been drinking there, or maybe homeless people were hanging around. This happened on a weeknight. I had stayed late at work because one of my coworkers, a guy named Rick, needed help finishing up on a Ford Ranger that was giving him hell with the brakes. We ended up finishing around 9:30 or so. I remember him joking, "You walking home in this dark, man? Hope no one jumps you." I laughed it off, told him I had my multi-tool on me. He said, "That ain't gonna stop a bullet," and we both laughed, and I left. The walk home was fine. I had my hands in my hoodie pocket and was kinda just zoning out, kicking a rock along the road. The sky was really clear and you could see stars, which is rare near town. I passed by the warehouses and that's when things got weird. I saw headlights behind me on the road. Not unusual, but the car was moving slow, like slower than normal. I figured they were looking for an address or didn't want to bottom out on the potholes. I didn't think too much about it until I heard the engine rev a little, then die back down like the driver was hesitating. The car was some kind of older dark-colored car, maybe a Chevy or a Buick. It didn't look new, and the headlights had that yellow tint like they hadn't been replaced in years. It rolled past me, then slowed down again a little further up. That's when the passenger side door suddenly opened, and a woman practically fell out. She scrambled to her feet and ran straight off the road into the tree line. The driver didn't stop for her. He hit the gas and sped off like he was pissed. The whole thing happened so fast, I wasn't sure I'd processed it right. I slowed down, staring at the trees she disappeared into. The woods on that side weren't thick, more like a patch of brush and then a line of trees separating the road from a bigger field. I stood there like a few seconds, not sure what I should do. Part of me wondered if it was some kind of domestic fight, like she wanted out of the car and he let her go. But the way she bolted, it didn't look normal. I kept walking, and maybe a minute later, I heard movement in the brush. The woman came out again, and I saw she was bleeding. Her shirt had a tear in it, and there was blood on her arms and near her side. She was breathing heavy and looked absolutely terrified. She walked right up to me, not even really caring who I was, and said, "Please, call the cops. That's my boyfriend. He tried to take me. He has a knife." Her voice cracked when she said knife, and I could see her hands trembling. I had an older Android at the time, cracked screen and everything, and I remember fumbling with it because my hands felt clumsy. Just as I pulled it out, headlights came from the other direction. Same car. He had turned around. The car slowed as it reached us. I remember the sound of the tires crunching the gravel at the edge of the road and the way the headlights lit up the trees. The guy leaned halfway out the window. He had something shiny in his hand, a knife, and he waved it in the air. Then he slammed on the gas and took off again, the sound of his engine echoing down the road. I called the cops. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what was happening, where we were, described the car, everything. The woman was beside me the whole time, clutching her side and looking back and forth like she expected him to come back again. Within about 10 minutes, which felt way longer, 2 patrol cars showed up. They put her in the back of one and asked me questions. I gave them the description of the car, the guy, what he did. They told me I did the right thing by calling. Officer asked me if I noticed how badly she was hurt, and honestly, I hadn't. I'd seen blood, sure, but I thought it was surface cuts or scrapes. Later, I found out she actually had stab wounds. I never even realized it in the moment. They ended up catching the guy that night, not far from town. Turned out he really was her boyfriend, and she'd been trying to break things off with him. He'd picked her up earlier in the evening, and I guess it escalated. I never saw her again after that night. The part that bothers me the most is how easy it was to miss how bad she was hurt. She was talking, walking, and still managing to explain everything, and yet she had stab wounds. I was wondering what would have happened if I'd brushed it off or assumed she was exaggerating. That's the kind of thing that makes me realize how dangerous people can be, even in a small town like mine. I don't really know where to even start with this, because when I think back on it, it feels like this weird mix of a regular memory and a nightmare. Like it's something that happened to me when I was younger, but it doesn't feel like I ever got closure. So I'll just go from the beginning. At the time, I was about 15, maybe 16. My family had this old house way out in the rural part of town. Technically, it was my grandparents' place, but they let us use it a lot in the summers. I think it had been built in the 60s or 70s, because my mom always complained about the draft that came through the windows in the winter, and the plumbing always rattled like crazy whenever you flushed the toilet upstairs. We didn't live there full time. My actual house was about 30 minutes closer to town, but every summer, especially when school was out, my cousins and I would spend time there. My parents liked it because it kept us out of trouble, or at least that's what they thought. Out there, it was just acres of woods, some half-used farmland, and a creek that cut through the back of the property. No real neighbors close by except maybe the Johnsons, but even they were like half a mile down the dirt road. This was maybe the summer of 2010, give or take. I had just gotten my learner's permit, and I was constantly begging my uncle to let me drive his old Dodge pickup down the back roads. He let me a couple times, but only when my mom wasn't around. Anyway, one week in July, I was out there with two of my cousins, Sarah and Lindsay, and a family friend named Jenna. They were all around my age. We spent most of our days doing teenager stuff, sneaking beers from the cooler, taking walks down to the creek, daring each other to go farther into the woods than we normally would. That house had no TV, and the internet barely worked, so we made our own fun. We were sitting out on the porch, and I remember Sarah had a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos that she wouldn't share. Lindsay was flipping through a dog-eared copy of some gossip magazine she brought, and Jenna was painting her toenails neon pink. The sun was going down, and the cicadas were starting up in the trees, that buzzing sound that fills the whole air. At some point, Jenna pointed out into the woods. "Do you see that?" she asked. We all kind of leaned forward, squinting, because the tree line was a good 100 yards from the house. I thought it was nothing, just the way the shadows were shifting, but I saw him. It was a man. It looked like one. He was standing there, kind of between two trees, like he'd been caught mid-step. He had on dark clothes, at least darker than the sunlight made everything else look, and he wasn't moving. Sarah said, "What the hell?" We all went quiet. I could hear the squeak of the rocking chair Jenna had been in as she stopped moving it. Then the guy bolted, like sprinted deeper into the woods, not across the clearing, just straight back into the trees. We all kind of laughed nervously after that, because what else do you do? Jenna said, "Maybe it was a hunter." Lindsay suggested it might have been a neighbor checking on property lines. Nobody really knew, and honestly, we were too wrapped up in our own teenage world to care much beyond the initial weirdness. We ended up going back inside, making popcorn on the stovetop, and playing cards until it got dark. At the time, I didn't think that much of it, but a few days later, the first thing was the smell. I noticed it when I went outside to hang some towels on the porch rail to dry. It was faint at first, like something sour carried on the breeze. By the next day, it was stronger, rotten, earthy, like something dead in the woods. I remember asking my uncle if maybe an animal had crawled under the porch and died. He made a face and said, "Just a raccoon." He even went and looked under there with a flashlight, but didn't see anything. That night, Sarah complained about it too, saying it was so strong it made her lose her appetite. Then, we heard that other families in the area were smelling it too. My mom talked to the Johnsons when she ran into them on the dirt road, and they mentioned their kids wouldn't play outside anymore because the smell made them gag. It just hung there for days, like invisible fog. You'd walk outside and it would smack you in the face, thick, cloying, the kind of smell that gets stuck in the back of your throat. One afternoon, maybe 3 or 4 days after we first noticed it, word started going around that someone had found something in the woods. We didn't hear it directly at first, just through little bits of gossip. My uncle came in from the gas station down the road and said, "People are saying some hunter found bones back in the pines." That got our attention. Bones? He didn't know much more than that, just that it wasn't an animal. Supposedly, the sheriff's department had been called out. That night we saw the police cars, red and blue lights flickering between the trees, parked along the dirt path that cut into the woods about a quarter-mile from the house. We could hear voices, men talking, the occasional burst of static from radios. Of course, we were nosy teenagers, so we tried to sneak closer, but one of the deputies spotted us and told us to get back to the house. Later, my mom told us that they found remains, but not a whole body. She wouldn't elaborate, just said we should stay out of the woods until things settled down. We didn't really get straight answers. The smell eventually faded, though, like it had just lifted off with the wind. And that was it. When I think back, I wonder if that guy was connected. Like, was he running because he heard us? Or was he running because he was doing something he didn't want to be seen doing? The whole thing feels like this unfinished chapter of my life. To this day, I don't know what really happened out there. I live out in the country, in Illinois. My name's Mark. I'm 38, married, no kids. My wife works nights at a nursing home in town, so a lot of evenings I'm by myself. We've got a decent piece of property, about 5 acres, enough space where neighbors aren't right up against you, but not so far you're isolated. On the back side of the land there's an old barn. It was there when I bought the place, and I've never done much with it. It's not falling down, but it's old, wood siding faded gray with rusty tin on the roof. The doors are warped, the windows are dirty, and it smells like dust and hay and mice. I've kept it locked with a padlock since day one, mostly because I don't want kids from the neighborhood messing around in there and getting hurt. I never had reason to go in, except when I first bought the property. There's some old junk in there, rusty tools, a couple of busted chairs, a broken wheelbarrow. The floor creaks when you walk on it, and there are birds that sometimes build nests up in the rafters. That's about it. I just leave it alone. So, for background, I work construction. I do siding and roofing mostly, early mornings, long days. By the time I get home, I just want to shower, eat, maybe watch some TV and call it a night. Weekends I mow, do stuff around the house, maybe grill. Pretty normal. About 2 months ago, I started hearing weird noises out there. At first, it was just at night when I was in bed. Our bedroom's in the back of the house, and when it's quiet, you can hear things out in the yard. I'd be laying there, and I'd hear something like boards shifting or a dull thud like someone dropped something inside the barn. Raccoons or possums, maybe. We get plenty of those. But after a couple weeks, it started sounding different. I'd hear scratching, or what sounded like something brushing against the inside of the doors. One night I swear I heard a low whistle, like someone exhaling through their teeth. That one made me sit up in bed. So I finally decided to go check. It was afternoon, like 3. Bright out, nothing spooky. I grabbed the key from the drawer, walked back there, and unlocked the padlock. The hinges squealed when I pulled the door open. I walked around inside, checked the corners, looked under the workbench. Nothing. Just cobwebs and bird crap. The only tracks in the dirt were from mice. I stood there for a while, listening, totally quiet. I felt kind of dumb for even checking, but I locked it back up and went inside. That night, though, I heard it again. Knocks, like someone tapping on the wall. My dog, a black lab named Tucker, lifted his head and growled low. He almost never does that. A few nights later, things escalated. I had fallen asleep in the recliner watching TV. Around midnight, I woke up to what sounded like voices. At first, I thought the TV was still on, but it was dark in the living room. I muted my phone just to be sure, and I could still hear it, faint, drifting in through the open window. It sounded like 2 people talking. a man and a woman. They weren't yelling, just kind of muttering and laughing. The weird thing was, it had that slurred, loose sound, like drunk people. You know when someone's had too much and they can't quite string words together clearly? That's what it sounded like. I went to the window and peeked out. The voices were coming from the direction of the barn. I grabbed a flashlight and slipped on my boots. My first thought was some teenagers had gotten in there somehow, even though it was locked. I cut across the yard, trying to stay quiet. The grass was damp from dew, and there were crickets buzzing. As I got closer, the voices got clearer. The woman was giggling, saying something about it being funny, and the man was kind of mumbling back. The tone of it was what unsettled me. They sounded way too casual, like they belonged there. When I rounded the corner, the barn doors were cracked open, and a man and woman were stepping inside. They both looked to be in their late 30s or early 40s. The woman had long blonde hair that looked stringy, and she was wearing this loose white tank top with a cardigan over it. They both moved like they were tipsy, kind of stumbling, leaning into each other. I shined the flashlight at them and said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" They both stopped and turned to look at me at the same time. Their faces didn't change, no surprise or embarrassment, just this blank stare. The woman turned her head and smiled, but it didn't look like a normal smile. It was wide and stiff, like she was trying too hard. The man just squinted at me, swaying a little. I said, "What are you doing? That's my barn." The woman laughed, this weird, breathy laugh, and said, "We were just talking." Her voice was slow, like she was dragging the words out on purpose. I told them I was calling the cops if they didn't leave, and the man spoke up. He said, "Don't call nobody." His tone was flat, almost like he was repeating something he'd heard before. I lifted my phone and said, "I'm serious." They looked at each other, then both turned and started walking out of the barn. Not fast, not apologetic, just calmly, like it was no big deal. They passed by me without saying another word. The woman's eyes lingered on me a second too long, her smile fading into something blank. Then they walked down the dirt road and disappeared into the dark. I stood there for a while, heart pounding, then finally went back inside. I did call the sheriff's office and reported it. I figured that was the end of it. But a few nights later, around 2 a.m., I heard the garage door rattling and heard the distinct sound of metal scraping, like someone trying to pry it open. I grabbed the bat I keep by the bed and went to the door that leads into the garage. Tucker was barking like crazy. I flipped the light switch, but the garage lights didn't come on. The breaker hadn't tripped. The bulbs were just unscrewed. And I saw something near the side door. The woman. She had something shiny in her hand, and when the light from my flashlight hit it, I saw it was a kitchen knife. She turned her head toward me and grinned, that same stiff smile. The man was standing behind her, just watching. He wasn't trying to help, wasn't moving, just standing there, eyes locked on me, like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I yelled, "Get the hell out of here," and stepped forward. She suddenly lunged, swinging the knife. I managed to shove her hard, and she stumbled back into him. That's when she hissed, "We're gonna hurt you." The way she said it, it didn't sound drunk at all. They both stared at me, then turned and bolted out the door into the night. I locked everything up, grabbed my phone, and called 911. Deputies came again, searched the property, but didn't find them. Since then, nothing's happened, but I can't shake it. Those two weren't just messing around. They weren't drunk either. They wanted to hurt me. And the way they talked, like they were practicing something or rehearsing lines, it chilled me. I don't know who they are or where they went,